So in order to defeat a disease, it's really helpful if you're able to catch it early. And for over 100 years since the disease was described, we did not have tools that allowed us to diagnose Alzheimer's while people were alive. So in 2001, the Alzheimer's Association funded Dr. Bill Klunk at the University of Pittsburgh, and he came up with a compound known as Pittsburgh Compound B. Now, this compound is a tracer that allows us to see, that binds to these amyloid plaques and allows us to see the amyloid while people are still alive. So that's what's seen here in the beautiful red and green image, with the red showing the hotter regions where there's high levels of amyloid in the brain. But since then, the field has exploded with tools that are research on tools that are looking to help with early detection and accurate diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. I'll talk a little bit more about blood tests, but those are in very, very active development. And people are looking at all sorts of things, including the genes that are differentially expressed when someone has Alzheimer's, people looking at the eye. And a couple of days ago, I even saw that people are looking at changes in people's voices to help with diagnosis of Alzheimer's. But when I say that we're targeting this from all angles, that is truly what is happening in the field right now. We are also, in addition to the new era of treatment, we are also in a new era of diagnostics. So initially, the disease was diagnosed symptomatically when people got into the clinic, but now we have these tests. So tests looking at cerebrospinal fluid, that is the fluid that surrounds the brain and the spinal cord, because what's happening in the brain can be reflected there in the spinal cord, in the spinal fluid, excuse me, and also these blood tests, which have seen rapid development in the past 5 to 10 years. We've got several tests that are in development to look at the different stages of the disease. Now, people are going further and further back to the more asymptomatic stages so that we can start to intervene early before the amyloid and the tau changes start to lead to the death of these brain cells. And we currently have three blood tests that are on the market, and none of the blood tests have been FDA approved, by the way. They have lab clearance, but they've not been FDA approved yet. So they're being used in clinical trials as well as specialized clinical settings. But the cerebrospinal fluid test has been FDA approved, and we expect more on the horizon any day now. Now, I talked about the cost of Alzheimer's disease, and the reason why I kind of bring this up is that one of the arguments that people make when it comes to the coverage of some of the up and coming drugs is that it may be too expensive to Medicare. But in 2022, Alzheimer's cost the U.S. $321 billion, with a B, not an M, billion dollars. Now, this is a number that is expected to rise this year to $345 billion. This is in part coming from Medicare and Medicaid, which are kind of the two biggest payers, but out-of-pocket costs are also huge. And the projection is that if we don't find effective therapies that slow down the course of this disease by 2050, this number is going to reach $1 trillion. That is with a TR. I think Apple recently became $1 trillion company and then fell out of it. That's how staggeringly huge that the amount of cost of Alzheimer's is. But the good news that I'm here to talk about here is that we do have treatments that have been approved by the FDA. Now, to give you some historic perspective on how far we've come as a field, Alzheimer's was first described by Dr. Alois Alzheimer, a German neuropathologist, in 1906. It took 90 years before the first drug, which I know lots of people are familiar with, Aricept, hit the market. Now, Aricept and all the other drugs in kind of the gray box here, these are symptomatic treatments. So these are treatments that that target the symptoms of the disease. Now, as I've kind of emphasized throughout this talk, those symptoms don't appear until 10 to 20 years after there's been damage in the brain. So what we need are treatments that target the underlying biology of the disease so that we can stop the disease from developing to a point where we see those symptoms or slow it down. Now, these treatments are the people call them disease modifying treatments, but we like to think of them as treatments that target the underlying biology. And in 2021, we got the approval of a drug called aducanumab, which was the first FDA-approved therapy that targets the underlying biology of the disease. In 2023, we also got the approval of lecanemab, which was very welcome to the field with very amazing positive results in the clinical trials. Now, looking to the future, we have another agent coming online. This is an agent known as donanemab. It's one that is still in clinical trials, so we're hoping to see some of the results in future meetings. All of these they target and remove amyloid, but we also want to make sure that we're targeting other aspects of the disease. It's also worth mentioning that these treatments that I'm currently showing are targeting the early stages of the disease. So the mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease, as well as the mild Alzheimer's dementia. But we're not taking our foot off the gas there. As I've alluded to several times in this talk, so many different biologies change when someone has Alzheimer's disease. Targeting only one of them is not going to give the maximal benefit. So we need therapies that target all of the different biological changes that happen when someone has Alzheimer's. And it's encouraging to see that there are over 140 unique therapies being tested in clinical trials today. These are things targeting the inflammation in the brain, how the brain uses energy, even how misfolded proteins can be stopped from clumping up together in the first place. Now, the Alzheimer's Association is helping to accelerate some of these efforts, including through our partner CLOUD funding program, which funds the clinical development of some of these therapeutics. Now, we've reached the era of the new phase of treatment. We want to move from there to the phase or the era of precision medicine, where we're able to have different therapies that are targeting the different changes in each person when someone has Alzheimer's or cognitive decline in a customized way. We cannot apply a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to therapeutics in Alzheimer's. This is why we're not taking our foot off the gas when it comes to the development of therapeutics. So, given the new era of treatments that we're in, we sought to understand what some of the barriers are that people are facing in accessing some of these treatments. So let's take a minute here and talk about what the ideal patient journey would look like, if all things were equal and we lived in a perfect medical system. So someone who's having some memory concerns will begin to notice some changes to their thinking or memory, and that will prompt them to have a conversation with their primary care physician. Now, this PCP will assess their medical history, conduct some physical and cognitive tests, as well as some lab tests. And then the PCP will then refer them to a specialist, and the specialist will conduct further evaluations. Now, the specialist can then use diagnostic biomarker testing and brain imaging and recommend even more testing once MCI is detected. Now, again, I harp on this point about MCI because there are reversible causes of MCI. So we want to make sure that the mild cognitive impairment is due to Alzheimer's disease. Now, if the person has amyloid beta in the brain, and that's part of how the disease is defined, then the person can be started on treatment and they're put on a schedule to be monitored for different side effects and benefits of the treatments. And in an ideal world, all of this happens, that it's a simple process, but that's not the case. So in our special report for this year, we asked two questions. First, what are some of the barriers facing individuals in terms of having these conversations with their primary care physicians? But also on the other side, what do the physicians perceive that their workload is? Because we know that there's significant barriers to getting to a specialist and accessing some of these physicians when you're having memory concerns. So we did some focus groups, and we found that individuals with memory and thinking concerns are hesitant to raise these issues with their physicians. Now, individuals who have specifically seen family members or friends go through the process of dealing with cognitive changes have an emotional reaction to this, and they also feel like they don't have the appropriate vocabulary to have these conversations. Also, the perceived risks outweigh the benefits. People think that if they get a diagnosis, that means they may be laid off work, they may have changes to the insurance coverage. Those sorts of issues tend to weigh heavy on people's minds. They also assume that doctors are immediately going to put them on some kind of treatment, whereas they prefer a holistic approach where they target diet and exercise. And also, individuals prefer to have these conversations with friends instead of their family members or medical professionals. We also spoke to the primary care physicians, and they said that they're not proactively asking their patients about these issues either. They hesitate to bring up these conversations, and they express concerns about follow-up care given the shortage of specialists. We know that about 55% of primary care physicians say that there are not enough specialists for follow-up in their communities. And most states in the US have to increase the number of practicing geriatricians and neurologists in order to meet the increasing demand. However, they do see the family members as a valuable resource in having some of these conversations and rely on family members to initiate these conversations about memory and thinking. So if we go back to this idealized patient journey that I talked about here, this very, very long patient journey, at the very first step, there is a barrier that prevents people from having these conversations with their primary care physicians. So some of the things that can be done to improve the physician and patient communication is starting these visits with kind of an informal conversation that can start to give you clues about the person's cognition. Also, having a standardized process will help overcome some of these barriers, and working with the family members to facilitate the conversation, and also making sure that we have outreach into the communities so that the individuals in the communities, both on the primary care physician side as well as on the patient side, feel equipped with the language to have these conversations in the first place.